Welcome to the continuation of the Katha Upanishad. We, as usual, begin with our prayer. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us. May we work together with great strength and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily quarrel with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we began with the third section of the first chapter of the Katha Upanishad. And it'll do us some good just to revise some of what we had studied. The theme, of course, is this internal dimension within us that is called Atman. And the language is varied. Sometimes it's called Purusha. Purusha is a cosmic term denoting a person. So we immediately have a view of us, which is something like another version, a macrocosmic version of our own self, complete with body, complete with mind, complete with limbs, represented by galaxies and stars and so on. If you use our imagination, we can clearly see that there's a body. And when we take this view of totality, it gives us not only an insight into the rhythm and harmony of the universe, but it also gives us some elevation of spirit, knowing it. So that it's not just one-dimensional, that we have to discover something within ourselves. When we discover it in ourselves, we discover it everywhere. There's universality about it. So before this third section, I just recap some of the concepts. You won't discover this inner entity if you have not desisted from evil ways. What do we mean by evil ways? This is not nothing to do with the so-called orthodox view of morality. When we come to the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a useful phrase, Mamai Vamso Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatanaha. An eternal portion of myself, says Krishna, this universal cosmic person, having become the embodied soul in the world of living beings, draws to itself the senses of the mind as the sixth, which are in nature, and what we call evil really is forgetfulness of this fact. So if you have not desisted from this way of thinking, and if you are not tranquil in mind, how easy is it to be tranquil in mind? One of the greatest difficulties in this world is reactions to all the given circumstances. Every time you tune into the news or something like that, it's always depressing. It leads to the point of hopelessness. But is the world actually like that? Or is there some hope anywhere? Today is a glorious day here in Ireland. The sun is shining, the sky is blue. The weather is crisp, maybe a little bracing. Nevertheless, all these factors that contribute toward this picture, we take for granted. And instead of saying, therefore, what a pity, can we not change it to say, what a glory? It is only when we look at these things carefully and gain a sense of appreciation about it that we're able to look at things different and be completely tranquil. So the Upanishad is telling us that you have to be peaceful. And there again, when we do a meditation workshop, one of the qualifications in order to meditate will be to have a certain equanimity of mind, a certain peacefulness, certain tranquility. And so the text goes on. Not he who has not concentrated the mind. Our greatest difficulty is a scattered attention. And modern technology doesn't assist in this. As soon as the telephone rings, we seem to be obliged to answer it immediately. Or somebody calls, we answer it immediately. The demands on our time, if we are not careful, will be huge and out of control and lead to a sense of lack of control, a sense of panic, a sense of mental disturbance. And so we need to take measures in concentrating the mind. Even in our normal daily work, a good sense of time management, organization, planning will assist in this. All of this is designed to concentrate the mind. Sometimes people come to me in a condition of high stress. They think I'll give them some spiritual wisdom. I give them time management. I say, here are a number of seconds provided for you, a number of minutes. Please don't think in of time in terms of chunks or hours. Think of them in terms of minutes. Don't say 1 hour, say 60 minutes. Don't say 2 hours, say 120 minutes. And then what arrives internally in the mind can be broken down into units. We can say like a second, 1 unit appearing. And when we review it, we're able to stand back and see, in the wake of some confusion or disturbance, what happened? A big storm came, a big storm went, what happened? And so in another talk I gave you the 4 R's. That is, react. You can't do anything else. Something comes up in the mind. It comes from the unconscious area. And then the next thing is we have the capacity to review what happened. With astonished eyes, we can see what happened. And we can trace a series of events. And then we can revalue things, put them in their proper perspective. And then we can replace our original reaction with a much better one. This whole process can be done in a series of split seconds, with a kind of sporting attitude, playing a kind of game of guiding thought. So concentration of the mind is necessary. Even when walking, doing it mindfully. When we go on retreats in Dalgan Park, there's a beautiful maze there. And when we last did a retreat there, we got people to walk very carefully, as slowly as possible. Maybe repeating a holy phrase or a mantra as they walk. But being conscious, how does the leg move? How does the arm move? How does the ground feel underfoot? What scents and smells are around? And we know we can only steer our attention 1 point at a time. 1 point per second. If you are smelling the fresh smell of grass, it's not possible to fully be aware of your foot falling on the ground. And so we alternate these sensations. It's a wonderful exercise prior to meditation, as a preparation for meditation, to sit and then be aware, point by point, of different sensations in the body. For example, let's take the knee. And we can take advantage if the knee is paining. We don't have to stop our meditation if the knee is suffering from arthritic rheumatism. We can concentrate all our attention there. And when we do that, we see all the sensations in there and we get a dual feeling. We feel the pain and yet we don't. It's an interesting phenomenon that takes place. So that in meditation, there can be no such thing as a disturbance, no such thing as a distraction, because every single object can be the subject of our concentrated attention. If we are in charge, and this whole talk that I'm giving leads up to this beautiful analogy of this chariot. You can imagine a chariot steady in its construction, with properly designed wheels, with spokes nicely distributed, all balanced, rotating on a nice axle, maybe on bearings to avoid friction, and going along. And you see, harnessed to that would be horses. If they're not trained properly, they'll resist. They'll even resist you harnessing them. And then they'll want to go off in different directions. Supposing there are 10 of them, 10 all running in different directions. Why would we say 10 in the analogy? Because we have 5 organs that operate as a reception area. Information, data gathering avenues, gateways. And then we have 5 expressive organs. That is 5 organs of knowledge, jnanendriyas, and 5 karmendriyas, 5 organs of action. But it is all reliant on the mind. These are all subject to the queen bee of the mind. Just as in a hive, if the bee goes off, all the bees have to go with it. And so, not even he whose mind is not composed can reach this through any amount of right knowledge. And just to emphasize the point previously, just to remind you that it says it can't be attained by instruction, it can't be attained by intellectual power, or much hearing, or any of these avenues. The intellect is useless in this regard. It's fine for all the physical knowledge that we require in modern science through observation, but it is absolutely useless in dealing with this entity. And just to remind you that curious phrase, he whom the self chooses. Now you can see the breadth of the subject matter, because supposing you're a dualist and you say, instead of saying self, we can say the innermost self, we can say that kingdom of heaven within, in which we find the king itself, the emperor. And there's another passage as we go on that tells us how this body is constructed like an 11-gated city, one of my most favorite passages, a way of revaluing even something like the body. And there we find who does it belong to? It belongs to one who is Atman, unborn, and one whose consciousness is unflickering. Somebody who is avakra, somebody whose consciousness is unflickering. We can imagine a flame in there. You light a candle, the candle will always flicker. You put it in a wind, it'll flicker. And like a lamp in the windless place is Sri Krishna's way of describing this kind of meditation, this meditative state. So saving wisdom can't be attained without these moral qualifications that have their root in the forgetfulness of this one passage, that an eternal portion of myself, having become the embodied soul in this world, living beings, draws to itself the senses with the mind as the sixth. This whole summary is called nature as such. So now let us pick up now what we may have covered last time also. And there's a very curious passage going on. It goes like this: Ritam pibanto sukratasya loge goham pravishto parame purarthi chaya tapao brahma vido vadanti panchajnayo ye cha trinachi kitaha. What does that mean? See, there seem to be 2 selves. Now this can be a very confusing passage, so I might need to illustrate this on the board. So the knowers of Brahman, or even if we read the commentary a little bit before that, thus also are presented 2 selves for distinguishing between the attained and the attainer, and the goal and the goal. 2 things are necessary in perception: a perceiver and the thing that is perceived. If we say that our actions produce merits, good and bad fruits, if you will, then there must be some entity that is able to register it. So the connection, says the commentator, beginning with this phrase, ritam pibanto, that has knowledge and ignorance have been presented as possessed of diverse opposite results. Naturally, good deeds produce good results, bad deeds, bad results. And so, for the determination of this is called up the analogy of the chariot, which we'll deal with later. And thus also are presented 2 selves for distinguishing between these 2 things: the attained, the attainer, the goal, and the goal. So the passage goes like this: the knowers of Brahman, those who know Brahman not in a post-mortem condition, but those who know Brahman here and now. In other words, those who have desisted from evil ways, those who have retain the tranquility of mind, those who have concentration, and those whose mind is not composed, or whose mind is composed, whose mind is meditative, then these people will be knowers of Brahman. They'll be knowers of truth. They'll also be knowers of the fact of death. That is also contained in that Yasya Brahma Cha Kshatram. He who, for whom priesthood and nobility, regardless of your status, regardless of your caste, it makes no difference. Death is not going to say, wait. A different reward is open to you, or you'll escape this phenomenon of death if you have a high status in society. No. Death will consume you regardless. And both are food for death. Death, all these things are a kind of sauce, if you like, or a curry for death. And so no respecter of persons. So who knows for certain who shall declare it, whence it was born, whence come this creation, the Rig Veda also says. Anyone lacking the qualifications that are mentioned previously, concentration, etc., tranquility of mind, and so on and so forth, these people will just succumb to a round of birth, life, and death. And the nature of the Supreme will not be understood. So, the knowers of Brahman and the worshippers of the five fires, there's a footnote there. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad mentions these five fires: Garhapatya, Ahavaniya, Dakshinagni, Sabya, Avastasya, and there are representative terms for it. We can examine each one. So each one is for a different purpose. If I want to gain a good afterlife, the heavens, if I want to get all that benefit, one fire. If I want to get good rainfall, another fire. If I want abundance in the earth, another fire. If I want to focus on an individual welfare around my own sense of humanity, one thing. If I want a relationship, another thing. If I'm a woman, another thing. All of these are within the scope of so-called normal human experience. So there'll be results because there's a causal law in operation. Who performed this Nachiketa sacrifice 3 times, which you have heard of before in the Katha Upanishad and was taught. Compare these two things as a contrasting thing, light and shade. They're different. The two enjoyers, there's not literally two enjoyers. It's the one enjoyer posed in different ways. It's just a convenience term. Of the inevitable results of work, who have entered within the body into the cavity of the heart. Is there a cave in the heart? Can we access this physiologically? Will you go to a surgeon and say, they tell me there's a cave in my heart, can I find it? A cavity there? They'll say, no, your heart is sound, we've tested it out, there's no hole in the heart, we can assure you. So none of this is to be taken literally. But what it means is the internal essence of your own being. And so we can view the body as a kind of multi-layered structure. The outside, and here we find the Taittiriya Upanishad very useful in this. Here we find a layer that is made just from yesterday's bananas and porridge. Just food, it's made from food. And then there's an energetic, subtle, morphological body within that. Within that we find something called mind. All of this is material so far. And then within that we find this inner cave, this subtle area called intellect. The intellect itself is the cave, is the innermost recess. And when this becomes enlightened, in other words, when the key to it, the innermost essence of it is discovered, then we see that the intellect has borrowed light. It doesn't have any self-effulgence of its own. And there we find this glorious discovery. And we can use this for meditation purposes, therefore. Imagining, therefore, internally that there is this innermost womb. So Hindu temples will reconstruct this. If you can't meditate, then you go to a mandir. And the word mandir has the same root as manasa, mind. And so the external walls represent the physical. Some ancient temples were rediscovered by the Victorians in the 19th century. They were shocked to see erotic carvings on these temples, because up to then the Victorians had only known with great shock and horror the ankle or something like that. And so this great erotic carvings being there, but this is human life. There's no shame in it. It represents the humanity and the desires of the humanity. But we can't stop there. When we go a little further, the whole thing representing the humanity, a human person. And furthermore, the whole thing represents the entire cosmos as well. And so it is customary to perambulate clockwise. And the next courtyard that we find will be that which is made from pure energy. And the next one will be from the mind. And the next one, the intellect. And finally, we get to the garbha, as it's called, the womb, the internal thing. So that when we see the image of a deity, it is actually very, very small. So let me get rid of this incoming call here, sorry. It is very, very small, because in the Upanishads, we see that this Atman is described as the size of a thumb. It's not that it has any size at all. It's just for meditation purposes. So entered within the body into the cavity of the heart, which is the supreme abode of the Most High, Brahman. So there's a huge commentary on here, which we should go through. So to drinkers, ritam means truth, because whatever you do, whatever deed you have done or thought, is subject to the law of causality. That's the truth about it. That is the results of work. It is called truth because of its inevitability, says Shankaracharya. Of these two, one drinks or enjoys the fruit of work, though not the other. The other is not an enjoyer in that sense, doesn't partake in it, because it is always a witness. It doesn't come, it doesn't go, it doesn't move, it doesn't act. Still, both are called enjoyers because of association with the enjoyer. On the analogy of the expression, the possessors of the umbrella, in other words, it's highlighting a convenient term that is there in Nyaya kind of logic. Just to explain, there's a footnote. When a king with his retinue moves out in the procession with umbrellas, people say, Chatrinaha yanti, people with umbrellas are going. That is a plural thing. Not one person is going. All of them are going. Though most of the people in procession do not possess umbrellas. So in that sense. All right. This word is to be construed with the ritam mentioned earlier, the meaning there by the drinker of the result of the work done by oneself. And so, pravishto, these two have entered. Where? Loge, within this body, within this location. Goham is the same as gohayam, that is the cavity into the intellect. Parame means in the supreme, that is in the space within the heart. Metaphorically. And this is supreme in comparison with the outer space circumscribed by the human body, because this entity is beyond all space. We can't say it's contained within anything. So into that abode of Brahman, that is the supreme, there indeed is the supreme Brahman perceived. And so we find now the meaning. The meaning is that they have two, that they too have entered into the supreme abode of Brahman, and which is the space within the heart. This is called the knowers of Brahman, that is Brahmavidaha. But until they speak of these two, again, as different. Don't forget, they're only speaking. All speech is conceptual. So they talk of them as chaya, tapo, light and shade, a contrasting thing. Because of their worldliness and freedom from worldliness, they are completely different. And yet the enjoyer is the same ultimately, looking like two things. So not only those who have given up rights speak in this way, but also Panchajnaya, that is, those who worship the five fires, that is, the householders, and also those who are Trinachi Ketaha, the people by whom has been piled up three times the fire, thrice the fire, called Nachiketa. Now, we can access this Atman in two ways. We can do it very directly. It's very difficult. Or we can do it progressively. We can acknowledge that our ultimate goal and where we stand now is separated in some way. This is our own experience, but it's also the cosmic experience. And so we can use another analogy coming in here. And that is also we can employ an English phrase, bridging the gap. See, if you go on the dot, they'll tell you, mind the gap. All right, there's always a gap. All right, but we know how to get over the gap. The problem is we don't often get that warning, mind the gap. So somebody should tell us, yes, Scripture itself is telling us. And it's not only this Scripture. This analogy of a bridge is used widely in a number of different places. So let us explore this. Now, this term Rita, coming back to that, signifies, of course, a divinely established order of things. So Rita, an inevitability of truth, is truth about everything. And we mentioned previously how wonderfully the universe is ordered, how rhythmic it is. And this law of causation is part and parcel of it. And so there's a divinely established order of the universe. It is both there natural and also moral. It is universally known and accepted that there are moral duties or moral aspects. If we go to Patanjali Yoga Sutras, we find these clearly described as yama. And since we are dealing with this yama, the lord of death, and also having the double meaning of control, it is good perhaps to look at that practical aspect. And so these are fivefold, universal moral precepts that is applicable to everybody, regardless of historical context, regardless of geographic position, regardless of religious affiliation, regardless of whether you phrase these in terms of Buddhist Eightfold Path, or whether you phrase it into Abrahamic 10 Commandments. There are 5 things we all agree on. You should not kill anybody. You should never kill anybody. The whole human personality is reviled by such a deed. And so ahimsa is a very high value. Now ahimsa is a negative term, means non-injury. Don't injure anybody. But on the positive side, it means love. Love is the very highest thing. We were reading a passage last night. Sri Ramakrishna is praying to his understanding of Brahman in the form of Divine Mother. And he's saying, I could say, take my goodness, take my evil, take my all these pairs of opposites, take this, but please give me only one thing, give me love. You can take everything else, but give me only love, because love supersedes everything. We were at a conference with a group of school students, high school students. Part of their leaving certificate is going through the religious curriculum. And these were intelligent students who asked many wonderful questions. One question that was asked was, where is our borderline in this non-injury? Where is our justice borderline? At what point do we say, no, let us not turn the other cheek anymore? Now I have to give you a humorous statement that Swami Vivekananda gave. He was asked the same question. It was phrased like this. Jesus said we should turn the other cheek. Do you agree with it? Of course, Swami Vivekananda was all for strength, stand up. So he didn't answer immediately. You're expected a non-violent monk to immediately say, yes, turn the other cheek, whatever the circumstances, and do it infinitely. He didn't give that answer. Thoughtfully, he said, yes, turn the other cheek. But the second time, punch him on the nose. So we have to establish some borderline somewhere, you see. And we also have to acknowledge two types of saints are there: the administrative saint and the non-violent monastic saint. Most people are the administrative type. So we have to assert a level of strength. But when we talk about this justice, see, for all over the place, it has become common practice in some religions to set up commissions of justice and peace, as if this was the highest value. I pointed out that these values of justice and peace are secondary in their nature. Love is the highest thing. Love is the supreme value. If we have that, then we've solved all the world's problems. And the basis for that love is this recognition of this internal entity that we're talking about in these Upanishads. We can personalize it. We can say that it is God himself who sits there in the heart. We can use our imagination there, replacing the ordinary human person with the divine, with all the heavenly attributes and angels and saints all around it, with heavenly music and clouds, using the full capacity of creative imagination. That we can do. Or we can say, think of this as a pouring entity, this one cosmic self pouring itself through all hands, all heads, all eyes, all hands, all legs, or upadis, that is, all limiting agents. Every kind of vision like that. Both will be valid, but both require a shift in our so-called normal view. And so if we have love, if we understand the oneness of everything, and we have a love which is automatically non-demanding. In other words, it's not like the so-called normal human love. Human love is demanding. It's a bargaining process. I love you if you love me. If you don't love me, I hate you. That kind of thing. Same thing in religion. I love you if you love my God. If you don't love my God, then I hate you. You're not one of us. I've heard in interreligious dialogues, some people of certain religions, no names are pactual, and when they acknowledge somebody who is from their same religious fraternity, they call them brother or they call them sister. What about the rest of humanity? Are we not your brothers? Are we not your sisters? So this quality of ahimsa is a universal moral value and it contributes to the normal running of things, contributes toward the thing that holds everything together in harmony. So love is a very high value and truth is a high value. Sri Ramakrishna was saying in that same passage, I could not give up truth. Give me truth, I give you truth, I give you untruth. And please give me love instead. He could not say it. He could not utter it. So truth is the other high value. And truth means that there's consistency in thought, word, and deed. What I think, what comes out of my mouth, and what I actually do has to be consistent. And when I utter it, when that alliance is made, I cannot resist it. If I say I'm going to go and do something, even though circumstances might change, I still have to go and do it. That was Ramakrishna's absolute strict adherence to this quality of truth. And then, of course, this self-control has to be there. And self-control really means that we have to take the God of the taste and the God of sex pleasure, these two things, and we have to divert this energy elsewhere. We have to transcend these things. According to modern evolutionists, these are the two genetic directives that are essential for evolutionary progress. But if that were the case in terms of man, then Buddha, Jesus, all of these entities, Ramakrishna, etc., would be magnificent failures. They would be absolute failures. They would not represent any high ideal, and yet they are the highest ideals we can think of in terms of humanhood and humankind. So these elected to control this, to control these two genetic directives. And then we come to this aspect of non-stealing, and we come to this aspect of independence, described or translated by Swami Vivekananda as non-receiving of goods, non-receiving of gifts. It doesn't mean to say we don't receive a gift. It means we don't become obliged to the other person. We don't become the slave to the other person. So these are 5 universal precepts, 5 universal moral values that are fixed and contribute toward the established order of things and the order of the universe in its moral sense. And it refers to the divine order connecting deeds with their results. So Shankaracharya means by it the truth, because it's just the inescaping fact of things. The individual soul, just to be clear before we move on, and the Supreme Self, these go back to ancient concepts, and different approaches will have different points of view on it. Shayana, for example, commenting on this particular verse, will say that the reference is to the 2 forms of the Atman, that is, the Jivatman, the so-called individual soul. We have to clarify terms, because these are often questions that are asked. What is the difference between Jiva? What is the difference between Atman? And the answer lies in these layers I've just discussed. When we take the internal self, the Atman, as feeling embodied, that is, having all the other layers and embodies, having the layers of sheets and identifying himself, itself with it, is what we call Jivatman, the Jiva. Jiva itself means life, something that is living. And living, enjoying, gaining the fruits of your activities is described as Jiva. We might call it in English soul, but Atman is pure spirit. One of the great transformational events in my own life was when I discovered I'm not a body with a spirit. I'm a spirit with a body. And there's a world of difference between the 2 approaches. So how can the self, which is represented as looking on without eating, and we know it is, be treated as experiencing anything? No, it is just all a kind of trick, and even a trick of speech, if you will. And you can even take it really in a dualistic sense. This is how broad this passage can be. Just as we can say, only the one to whom the self chooses to reveal itself. We can also say, only the one that God reveals itself, himself or herself or itself through its grace. It is all subject to grace. But we know the grace is ever present. The grace of the RTE transmission is always flowing, and here and now, and I can catch it now. I don't have to go to a studio for it. I don't have to wait for it. I don't have to make a petition, please deliver the broadcast to my personal door. So that even a dualist such as Madhva finds support in this verse for a doctrine of the entire disparateness of the individual and the universal souls. You can take it in that way, but as a final conclusion, it will fall apart. So all this indicates that while meditation is the way to saving knowledge, salvific knowledge, due to the performance of ordained sacrifices, that is a way. It is a progressive way. The other way is to realize it here and now. We are capable of doing that. But there's another way, and both are valid. And that both are aimed at bridging this gap. Yas situr ijananam aksharam brahma yat param abhayam titor shatam param nachiketam shake mahi. So, the bridge, that is what it is referring to. We have known that Nachiketa fire, that is this ritualistic activity, deemed for a specific result, a post-mortem result, which is the bridge of those who sacrifice, as also that which is the undecaying supreme Brahman, whoever get one or the other or both, beyond fear for those who want to cross over the world. This example of a bridge I have to pick up, because we find it as a universal example. Let us pick up some other more universal examples. In Buddhism, we can see that the way from the vortex of existence, as it's described, of samsara, as a continuous vortex, a continuous wheel of repeating the same thing over and over again. The other day I was at the Chestabiti Library. I say the other day, I have no idea when it was. Maybe it was a few days ago, maybe it was a week ago. And the person who was guiding us around the Buddhist section was saying, Buddha was revolutionary for the first time. What he did was, he said, no. The aim of life is not the samsara. The aim of life is nirvana. But this is mentioned previously, you see. Nobody reads these texts. And so, to get out of the samsara, the extinction of life's fires, otherwise called nirvana, the method is the Eightfold Path, no doubt. I am the way, and it also mentions Tathagatas, that is, those who are crossing the river, if you will, of the samsara. And then, of course, we find other examples. I am the way, that's in John's Gospel, and he who himself, or who calls himself the way, appeared to the great saint, Spanish saint, Catherine of Siena, in the form of a bridge extending from heaven to earth over all mankind had to pass. Again, the image is used in two ways of crossing the river of samsara, mentioned, and they're also indicated in the performance of Vedic sacrifices, which leads to the heaven of the deities, if you will, heavens as we conveniently picture them, and also the knowledge of Brahman, going on from there, going to that as a stage, if you like, to go on further. That means if you study this, there's not much theological differences, because heaven is seen or interpreted in Christian theology as not being a place at all. It's being a state of divine presence. And the state of divine presence is also described as a culmination called mystic union in Eastern Orthodoxy. So we can choose a path of gradual liberation. The warning, of course, is not to have a blasé attitude about it. And it requires great discipline. Now we come then to the parable of the chariot. This parable of the chariot, we brought it up last week. So here we are just have done something of a recap. It's a very powerful image. Let us take the text. Atmanam ratinam viti shariram pratam eva tu. Buddhim tu sharidim viti manaha pragraham evacha. So we have to know, and here we see that there is almost theistic language being used. Know the individual self, that is this Atman, that appears to be an individual, as the master of the chariot, if you consider it to be seemingly embodied, and the body as the chariot. Know the intellect as the charioteer, and the mind as truly the bridle. So going through the various words here, of these viti know, Atmanam, the self, the enjoyer, that is, of the fruits of karma. That is what we've been talking about as a theme, which is the soul of the worldly state. Then Ratinam, the rider, the master of the chariot. Now we can say the Lord of the chariot. Now we can use something like deistic language or theistic language. And Shariram, the body, as the chariot. Since the body is pulled by the senses which occupy the place of the horses tied to the chariot, this we can see very easily. You may be listening to me, then there may be a loud bang, somebody drops something in the kitchen. Immediately your ears go there, the sound goes there, the sound waves have caught it, and your whole internal intention goes in this direction. And then you've missed a number of words that I've said. It's very easy to steer the attention away, particularly in this modern age of technology. It'll be a very interesting exercise. I think somebody did it before, to take away all your technology, mobile phones, computers, iPads, television sets, all of these things, take them away and experimentally see how long people last. I think it's an actual experiment that was done, so I'm told. And I think the maximum anybody could tolerate it was about 3 days. Imagine, so dependent are we. And yet it is a way of drawing the senses externally. It is a way of taking these horses and saying, please have your freedom any way you like. And the only attachment is the physical attachment to the chariot or the body. But it's an impossible thing. No wonder people are disturbed. If you let loose the reins and don't control anything, this is the most fundamental thing, is discipline, self-discipline, controlling the senses. Now, every religion has an opportunity to do that. So one such opportunity would be with Muslims when they make this fast. They do that. They go on this annual fast from sunrise to sunset, not even taking water. What an incredible discipline that is. If you take it in that way, if you don't say, okay, the sun has gone down, let us now have a feast, you see. But if you take it as people do take it seriously, it's not just the food that is being abstained from. It's being every single avenue of the senses is being restrained. It is the key behind the spiritual practice of self-discipline and fasting. It is the key behind many routine and regular disciplines in monastic life, yogic life, etc. Everybody should do it. Now, it's not just in a spiritual context. Imagine if you have to go and pass an examination. You can't pass an examination if you say, oh, today I think I'll study for half an hour. Tomorrow, maybe 3 hours. Next day, I think I have a day off. Next day, I'm not sure if I'll be in the mood. You see, you won't succeed. You want to learn a musical instrument for the first time. I saw somebody who once said, I can immediately identify anybody who takes up a musical instrument such as the guitar, whether they will succeed or not. The one who takes it up as a kind of casual interest, puts it up and puts it down, no consistency in their practice, they will not learn to play the guitar. Somebody who does it systematically, my time is this, don't interfere with it, it is sacred, I will not budge from it, this is for my practice. Relentless practice, hour after hour. These are the people who will master the instrument. This itself is an instrument, this body is an instrument. But the body is subject to a mind, there's a hierarchy in it. Once you subject the mind to discipline, then the body follows. Once you subject the intellect to discipline, the mind follows. There is a hierarchy in this. So the hierarchy is described, the reins are the things that control the horses. This is called manasa, not mind in the conventional sense, not an overall instrument. It's very handy, very convenient to think that the mind is rather an antakarana, an internal instrument. Body is an external instrument, rather than say mind. This can lead to some confusion in terms. So this reins are there, a connection between the intellect and the horses, the indriyas, the sense organs. That is there. And so who's in charge? the intellect, the discerning faculty, the chief executive, the one that has the capacity to make choices, decisions, determinations. And we'll see that modern psychologists are keen now to say, you made the choice, it's your choice. See? And then you may object severely. No. Yes, it was your choice. Everything is your choice. Now, when you drill it down, when you see what is the process of choosing or the process of reacting in any way, you will see, even though it's a rapid process, it still is a choice. And the choice was brought up early on. Remember, the preferable and the pleasurable, these two avenues were brought up early on. A constant discernment between these is necessary. This is what is meant by this control. And so, they call the senses the horses, the senses having been imagined as horses, the objects as the ways. The discriminating people call that self the enjoyer when it is associated with the body, the senses, and the mind. Because if you're watching a play, there has to be a play for you to enjoy it. If there's no play, you can't legitimately say you're an enjoyer. You can't say I'm a witness if there's nothing to witness. But the senses of that intellect, which being ever associated with an uncontrolled mind, becomes devoid of discrimination, are unruly like the vicious horses of the charioteer. We're repeating the same thing. But of that intellect, which being ever associated with a restrained mind, is endowed with discrimination, the senses are controllable like the good horses of the charioteer. But he, that master of the chariot, I'm going through this briefly because this is endorsing, is like underlying the theme over and over again. And when the Upanishad does that, no, it is important and has to be repeated over and over again in different ways. But he who, that Lord, that master of the chariot, does not attain that goal through that intellect, who being associated with a non-discriminating intellect and an uncontrollable mind, is ever impure, that is forgetful of this passage, that an eternal portion of myself, having become the embodied soul in the world of living beings. That is really what it is. So, is ever impure, that represents impurity, and he attains worldly existence. That master of the chariot, however, who is associated with a discriminating intellect and being endowed with a controlled mind, is ever pure, attains that goal, getting detached from which he is not born again. If the guide around the Chestibiti library had read this passage that predated Buddhism by thousands of years, were to have read this passage, she would not have been telling the group of interested tourists this fact about Buddha and Buddhism. All right. So, the goal is not to be born again. That is our goal. Our goal is to get a one-way ticket, not a return ticket. But we do our best, and if the ideal is out of our reach, then we know that we have more and more chances. We can consider this whole universe as an unlimited opportunity to pass unlimited exams. But that doesn't mean to say we take a sauntering attitude, a casual attitude. Imagine if I wanted to climb Mount Everest with a sauntering attitude, not doing any training whatsoever. I think, tomorrow I'll just go and do it. It will not be possible. 5-6 years training is necessary. You can see every person now wants to go and climb Mount Everest. Look at the fatalities that have occurred because of people not being fully prepared, thinking it is an easy task to do. No, it is not. So let us not underestimate the task ahead. The earlier we do it, the better. Then it goes on to say that the man, however, who has, as his charioteer, a discriminating intellect, and who has under control the reins of the mind, attains the end of the road, and that is the highest place of Vishnu. Why Vishnu? Because Vishnu of the all-pervading Brahman. Don't think that Vishnu is an entity. Vishnu means the all-pervading, the one that pervades everywhere. In other words, that supreme principle, Brahman, the supreme self, also called, of course, Vasudeva. Now you can also see a link between the Bhagavad Gita and the terminology that is used here. All right, so we're now at that ninth. Jnana Saratiya Yastu Manaha Pragrahavin Narha. Now there is an order of progression that we should take into account. This helps us to understand. We already have seen an order of progression in the analogy of the chariot. Beyond the senses are the objects. The sense objects are higher than the senses. The mind is higher than the sense objects. The intellect is higher than the mind, and the great soul is higher than the intellect, and so it goes on. Let us draw this on the board. So we'll do it in order. These are the objects. Objects of what? Objects of senses. So all this belongs to the physical. These senses, but these senses are also internal. When you dream, don't tell me that there are no senses in your dream. They're all internal. And higher than these senses are mind. And higher than mind is intellect. So far, so good. Let us see if we are on track. The sense objects are higher, even though we put them lower, because without these objects, there's no engagement with the senses. Anyway, we put them in this order. And then the mind is higher than the senses. The intellect is higher than the mind. And the great soul, Mahat as it's called, is higher than this intellect. Otherwise called cosmic mind. Whether it is dealing with the cosmos or whether it is dealing with the individual, so-called, structure is the same. If it wasn't the same, we'd be puzzled. How is the universe different? The unmanifest is higher than the Mahat. Unmanifest. The unmanifest is what the Sankhya's call nature or prakriti. So this is the potentiality, potential for all the others. Now, if we're puzzled, we can shift our terminology. We can put this as feminine, even though it's unmanifest. Unmanifest can't be masculine or feminine. Never mind, for convenience sake, we can put that. We can put this as word, if we have a mind to do it, or logos. A number of different terms that we can use for it. And then higher than this is the Purusha. There is nothing higher than the Purusha. So this Purusha, you see how terminology has shifted. Literally, Purusha means person. But naturally, if this is unmanifest, this also is unmanifest. So we have seen the hierarchy. So what is our spiritual process? Our spiritual process is we have to master the senses To master the senses, we have to master the mind. To master the mind, we have to master the intellect. To master the intellect, we have to identify with this progression, finally, this Purusha, ultimately. That's the progression that we're asked to consider. And this Purusha is the highest goal completely. Mahataha param avyaktat Purusha paraha. Purushana param kinchit sa kastha sa prakatihi. Now we'll see that each level is designed to reveal the next one, the next one, the next one. So next week we'll go into this in much more detail, and so that would be next Saturday we're aiming anyway to do the Enneagram. This is the basic Enneagram course. So if you've done it already, you may not want to repeat it, but some of you may want to repeat it, and if so, you're welcome to do so. But next weekend we're aiming to do the Enneagram. If you have not done the Enneagram before, I highly recommend it. And just to let you know what it's about, Enneagram and Essence of Truth is to do with the Vedanta philosophy and Sankhya psychology. The greatest obstacle that we have to this whole thing is the egoistic tendencies that we have cultivated. These are not standard egoistic tendencies. These are dependent on our base, and they are dependent on the influences as we grow up. How we are nurtured depends on how our character and behavioral characteristics form, until they become to us an enemy, which we take or mistake as a friend. And so, just to give you an example, supposing I am the oldest in the family, and I have to feel that I can survive by living up to the considerable demands of my father, then I might be inclined to be a little parent and struggle uphill all my life to meet that ideal of perfection, and be frustrated because I never get there. In which case, my problem is perpetual frustration and anger. And then I'm only reliant on myself, means I can't trust anybody else. I become overbearing, I become angry, otherwise fine. So these are some of the problems that we face, and like that, 9 characteristics like this are there. So it's in 2 weekends. The first weekend is to identify what personality type you are and how it formed, and what the other personality types are, so you can identify what other people are without any judgment, but just as a bare fact. And then the second weekend is what you will do with it, where you'll go with it, how you can make good use of it. So if you want to register, please send me an email or a text on WhatsApp, and I will include you. At the moment, we only have a few people, so if there are insufficient people, I may have to postpone it and replace it with a refresher to the Enneagram. But we'll see how it develops. Right? Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.